podcast for those who suffer, which is everyone.
It's a space where we can speak honestly about what it feels like to be in desolate places without losing hope.
Welcome to In the Thicket.
Hey guys, hello.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, it's going good. We're doing like a little intro thing here. We're doing something very special for Lent. Euthanasia series, which, just like a podcast on suffering, it's crazy that we're excited to be doing a series on euthanasia, but here we are.
Yeah,
there we go.
That's right.
I guess this is just, God's just given us this awesome and strange charism to be talking about these kinds of things. But yeah, I think we have a number of guests lined up over Lent. And so are different to our normal episodes where we have kind of standalone different topics. These are going to be connected along the subject line of euthanasia. And we're hoping that as people listen, you guys are going to get more informed as you listen. You're also going to be moved by the stories you hear. So Erin, why don't you share with everybody listening kind of our trajectory over the Lenten Euthanasia series?
Yeah. So today you're going to hear from Garnett Genuis, who is an MP from Alberta, and he's been kind of instrumental in the Canadian fight for looking at euthanasia and kind of preventing I guess a free-for-all in terms of access to euthanasia, or looking at conscience rights and things like that. So that'll be really, we're looking forward to having you hear that. And we're also going to be hearing from a doctor who's been active in palliative care and working with the elderly, his experience of death and pain and suffering, and his own conscience rights and what that looks like. We're also going to hear from a chaplain who's involved in hospital ministry, so about his experience of walking with people who are profoundly suffering or dying, and what that's been like. We're also going to hear from someone who is a disability advocate who has a disability herself and who is advocating for safeguards for those who are disabled. And we're also going to hear from a few other kind of voices, not directly in episodes, but that we'll post for you in other ways on the website and on social media, from other voices in the church, or a filmmaker, a lawyer, or another doctor. So kind of watch for some of those things too, and hopefully that'll kind of round out the series.
Yeah, and this came to us. I shared this in a story on Instagram, but this came to us really, we think, from the Lord in prayer and discernment, just before Lent, as we were thinking about what we were called to be doing. So, and since we've decided to do this, it's just lit a fire, at least in me. It's just been, just the importance of it has kind of come down in my mind as so clear. So I'm really excited about it. So yeah, I just want to know if, to get your thoughts, you guys, of why the series is important to you. Maybe Nicole, you can start. Like, why are you excited, or what's important to you about the series that we're doing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different angles, I think, that are converging for me to feel like this is exactly what we need to do for this month. But even it was funny. So Monday we had met, so like 6 days ago for our weekly podcast meeting. And that morning when I was praying, I had just what had come to me in prayer was just remembering, like, oh, we've got this bill that's that's in the process of going through the steps in the Canadian Parliament, and that will expand what is allowed with assisted dying in Canada with euthanasia. And I was just praying about that and feeling like, Lord, I feel so powerless. Like I don't know what to do. Like I think I've signed the petition against it, but I don't know what else to do, And then it kind of came up in a conversation this evening of like, hey, we could that evening of doing something on the podcast. So it just felt very like there was a connection there too. But yeah, even just I'm a music therapist, and I've done a lot of work. I've done a little bit of work in palliative care and a lot of work in just long-term care with seniors, and have just seen how loneliness affects people so deeply. And I often bring up my mom when I'm on this on the podcast, but she was sick a number of years ago, and I remember her going through this illness where she was in terrible, terrible pain for a number of years, and having moments where she was just like, telling God, hey, if you want to take me to heaven, like, I would be totally fine with that. And just like, knowing that there are so many people who are are in these positions of terrible suffering, but they don't have the same maybe hope that my mom was able to access, or the same community of love where we were just there with her. And so who are wanting to die, and who need love and who need compassion. So just like, yeah, so much loneliness and pain, and people who just need community and need love. And then we have this law that instead of maybe providing more care and more palliative care and support for people who are in these kinds of situations, is saying, well, you know what, they can just die, and how sad that is, and wanting to do something about that. So yeah, it gets me all fired up. I even, I remember writing a paper in undergrad in a Christian ethics course, and we were challenged to say, okay, it's great to look at the sort of ethical and technical arguments for certain Christian principles and morals and the moral stance that we take, like to look at the ethical arguments for that. But also, it's not just about ethical arguments, it's a call to action, and we're going to change the culture through our actions. And so I'm really passionate about that. And we have a call to action on our website, and ideas of what people can do. And so I think there's so much we can do that doesn't take actually a whole lot of crazy effort. And so I'm just, that's what I'm excited about, is just hopefully that, as you listen to this, that you'll be inspired of just doing some small things to build up this culture of support and community.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah. I think, for me, it makes me think about the experience that I had with endometriosis. So sorry if you're squeamish, just in case you don't know what endometriosis is. It is where uterine lining grows. Yeah, that's right. Uterine lining grows outside of the uterus in generally the abdominal cavity, and can, adhere to things. And it can be incredibly painful. And so, but it's also very hard to diagnose, and you can't get an official diagnosis unless you have surgery for it. And most often they won't actually do surgery. They'll just kind of try and prescribe you birth control pills, and, like all of these kind of stopgaps that are not actually treating it, but are just covering this thing that's happening. And so for me, it was a long time that it took to get a diagnosis of that, almost 10 years. And I probably suffered with it for much longer than that. But the last 2 years of that time, I was in pain every day, like every moment of every day. So it was the first thing that I encountered when I woke up in the morning was pain. It was the last thing that happened at the end of the day before I fell asleep, was like realizing that I had pain. When I was praying, it was like my thought, like I would be thinking about my pain and then trying to pray and think about and pain, and it was like it pervaded every aspect of my life. And I remember thinking about that in that time, that like feeling very hopeless on a number of occasions, and thinking like, I cannot live the rest of my life like this. Like I can't do it. This is too hard. And feeling so hopeless and thinking about dying, like, and not being suicidal, but like longing for an end to suffering, basically. And I remember specifically thinking in those times, like, I can understand why people would ask for euthanasia. I can understand why people would see it as really the only choice, because it's the other choice is dealing with your pain and futility. And so for me, like, it also pointed out the lack of access that a lot of people have, like that I was having, to adequate medical treatment that would treat the pain that I was experiencing. And I've even found that with fibromyalgia, that it's been severely deficient in terms of being able to access medical treatment for pain, and let alone palliative care, which is only probably available to about 10% of the population, so if somebody is in that much pain, like, so that for me is also a huge motivator of having us think about pain and suffering and end of life topics in a way that's like nuanced, and not just like, oh, euthanasia is awful. And yes, it is awful, but we need to also understand deeply the pain and the suffering that people are experiencing when they're asking for it, or the fear that they might be having. So that's also a hope. And I think that compassion can be exactly what you're talking about, Nicole, a springboard into actually doing something, like fulfilling the corporal acts of mercy, which we are asked to do as Catholics. That is not something that's optional.
Yeah. Which is why it's such a appropriate topic, I think, for Lent, because this, it encompasses all of those realities that we're called to engage with as Catholics. We have to go out there and be Jesus for for people who are suffering, for each other who are suffering. And in some of our conversations that we've already recorded, we've kind of alluded to this, that it does, you don't have to go very far. You can look within your own circle of friends and family to find those who are struggling and maybe struggling alone, and that's a huge, that makes a difference, to notice those people and to be there for them. It can make the difference, especially in a Canadian context where euthanasia is unfortunately legal, and that for me, so to add kind of a different dimension to what's kind of motivating us, I guess, as a team on this, is the reality that there is a law right now in our Canadian context in Parliament that is expanding access to euthanasia in devastating ways, especially from a Catholic perspective, but honestly from a lot of different perspectives, not just a Catholic perspective. And we talk about some of those in our series as well. And so this is Bill C7 that I'm talking about. And so it's very current and topical. And in addition to the culture change that we're going to have to get into that cultural battle more and more as the years go on, we do have a political and legal reality right now that we can stand up to, whether or not our stand will be successful, and we should stand up to it. And so this series is hopefully going to, our hope anyways, is that people will do something in both of those fields with a sense of urgency, because there is an urgent need right now for
There's
us
an actual window of time here.
Exactly. And so, and I guess it's always been an area for me as well of like, it's been a subject of passion for me in a sense, because of pro-life work that I've done kind of all through my student life into adulthood. But recently, I think a week ago, actually, just before our conversation, again, I heard Cardinal Collins give a homily. So his Sunday Mass last Sunday from the day we're recording, he gave a homily, which I think we're going to try and link to somewhere. Where he just kind of mentioned some of the things you guys, Aaron and Nicole, like have been talking about in terms of reaching out to family and friends, and in the context of Bill C7. And he spoke so eloquently, as he always does. So it kind of lit the fire again in me. And in addition to that, I, a few months ago, I think, was listening to a CBC radio program that was about euthanasia. And I think they were interviewing assessors, people who go in to see if patients meet the requirements, the legal requirements needed to qualify for euthanasia. And I remember a doctor gave testimony, I think, on that program, and she was saying, she was treating a patient. She said, normally people think of it as a sad situation, but in this one situation, she was treating someone and they were super excited, and all their family was really excited about this process. She walked into the patient's room on the morning that she was going to administer the drugs, the euthanasia drugs, and the woman was sitting up and had her hair done and like lipstick on and all these things. And her family was around her, and then she wanted to recite this poem before they administered the drugs. And she recited this poem, and at the end of it, because not all of her family approved, at the end of it, she was like, to all of you who disagree with me and didn't approve, like, F you and F off. And then everybody sort of cheered, and then they administered the drugs to her and she died. And the doctor was like, and it was so beautiful, and I don't know. I mean, obviously each of us has a subjective response to that story. But when I heard that story, I just was so deeply, like, I don't know how to explain, like disturbed, saddened, just grieved. Like, I was shocked. I think that's the word. Like, I was just shocked because it was such a twist around of what beauty actually is. And I could hear in the story, like, the good intentions of the doctor, of the family members that were there, even the woman who, was seeking this treatment. But I was just like dying inside, honestly, listening to the description of this scene as beautiful. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, like, Lord, what is happening? How do we, this is in a way, and I'm, without demonizing anybody in that situation, but this is in a way how evil works, I think, where we see something that is truly harmful and damaging to us, and we welcome it as good and beautiful, and we can't tell the difference.
Like the devil appearing as an angel of light,
Yeah.
I think that's precisely what's happening here in a very real way. we were kind of talking about this,
Yeah.
that there's something just like, this is just evil here, you know, because we don't, but it's masqueraded as compassion and as something good, because we've lost touch with what it means to suffer well, or
And to
to
love.
alleviate suffering, that it's
Yeah.
actually possible to have good palliative care that treats suffering, and to make that, you know, all these different things. Anyways,
Yeah.
we're going to talk about that in our episode.
We will
Yeah.
talk about all of it.
We're going to talk about all of it.
Yeah. And one of the things we also want to highlight, and you mentioned it, Erin, is like conscience rights of doctors. And that's another battlefront that right now is still urgent and happening. And so
doctors, nurses,
exactly.
like
all health
chaplains, everyone working in healthcare.
Yeah.
That's right. And we want good people in those positions, and good people are going to have to leave because their license is going to be on the line. So this is, and this is like, even just from a selfish perspective, right? Like, we're all going to get older. We want good people.
I want palliative care. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we don't want those doctors to leave. So please look into these issues as you hear about them from us and from other places. Get informed and get involved, and enjoy this conversation. Our first conversation is going to be with MP Garnett Genuis, as Erin mentioned, and he's fantastic. And it's just going to give you a primer, especially for Canadians. But even if you're not Canadian, we mentioned this in a few of our episodes. This should be like, look to us as, I think Garnett says this as an example of where not to go, and get informed, because it's not just in our country, it's happening globally in different areas as well. So please listen and get involved however you can.
And check out the website. We'll have all of the inthethicketpodcast.com. All of the information is there about how you can get involved, both politically and also just in terms of corporal acts of mercy.
Totally. And also that this is like, it's just striking me here, you know, we felt so called to have this conversation, and you know, to have this series and everything, and to that's a sign of hope. Like, the Lord is leading, the Lord is doing something. This is not, I think that's one of the big things that we can feel sometimes as Catholics is, oh, like, there's nothing we can do, and like the kind of despair. But that's not true. You know, we saw, you know, you think about, I always remember the movie Amazing Grace, where they're, you know, and striking down laws that were, you know, starting to strike down laws to get rid of slavery in England. And that happened, you know. And so just thinking about that, the Lord is powerful and knows what he's doing, and we just have to discern, what are we called to do. And so that's, I think, a big thing, is like, we're all called to do something about this, because this is an evil, and it's happening now. So what are we called to do, and to have hope in that?
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, you guys, enjoy. We hope you enjoy the series, and just get as involved as you can. God bless.
God bless.
God bless.
Okay, hello everybody. We are so excited to bring you this special episode of In the Thicket with an amazing guest, Mr. Garnett Genuis, who is an MP for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta. Welcome, Garnett.
Thank you. So great to be with you today.
Thank you. So we're doing this series on euthanasia over Lent, and we wanted to talk to you because you have been very involved in what's going on right now in Parliament with Bill C7, and even before that with the development of legislation and euthanasia, and just knowledgeable about that kind of stuff. So before we get into it, I just want people, if they don't know who you are, especially maybe our non-Canadian listeners, maybe share a little bit about who you are, how you got involved in politics.
Sure. Well, thank you for that opportunity. So I've been interested in politics my whole life. People sometimes ask me, how did you get into politics? Why did you choose politics? And I quote that line from Troy, where he says, "I chose nothing. I was born, and this is what I am." So, but I mean, there's more to the story than that. My grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. Her father was Jewish, and she was sort of hiding in Germany during the Second World War, and that, as well as sort of other aspects of my upbringing, really informed by an awareness of how important politics is. I mean, how badly things can get if in terms of politics, and on the other hand, the importance of politicians like Winston Churchill, who perceived issues and dangers and were speaking up about them. So you know, it wasn't that my family was all that political in a sort of capital P sense of dragging us out to campaigns, and we weren't the like door knocking, sign nailing in people, but politics was a constant topic of conversation, in part because we felt, at least on my mother's side, that we owed our lives to it, right? Like that if that our lives had been, our family history had been profoundly shaped by these events. And so a big part of my political activity since getting elected in 2015 has been working on international human rights issues. We've been doing a big push around addressing the horrific treatment of Uyghur Muslims in China right now, the genocide that's going on, and various other human rights issues around the world impacting Christians as well as other communities. So that's where some of my passions are. I would say the whole range of human life, human dignity issues, both here in Canada, around the world, have been a passion of mine since getting elected, and a lot of failures, some successes, and keep on going.
Yeah, that sounds like sort of a motto for if you're going to get into that kind of work. Just be ready for, lots of stumbling blocks and lots of failures, but just to have that perseverance to keep going, because the battle is so important. So speaking of the battle,
I referenced Churchill earlier. He said once, success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. So
right.
So here we are.
That's very encouraging, actually, for Lent too. So if you're listening and you're struggling with your Lenten practice, whatever that might be, don't give up. That's the the key. Just don't give up. So we're talking about one of the current battles about upholding the dignity of human life in the topic of euthanasia. And just to give some of our listeners a bit of background, obviously, if you're not Canadian, you may not be familiar at all with this, but in 2015, we had kind of a watershed case called Carter versus Canada. And in that case, the Supreme Court struck down criminal code provisions that prohibited physician-assisted suicide, saying that they were unconstitutional based on a section of our charter that talks about upholding the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So all they did was strike down those criminal code provisions, and then they left it up to Parliament to come up with some legislation around this. And that's how we ended up with what we currently have, which is called medical assistance, which they term medical assistance in dying, or MAID, MAID, sorry, for short. So Garnett, can you tell us, that happened right when you sort of got involved in legislating and the action on Parliament? So can you kind of give us a bit of background of the development of this and where we are today?
Yeah, so go through the story as briefly as possible. That prior to the 2015 election, there was a court ruling, and I'm not sure if this is similar to the way they do it in other parts of the world, but sometimes when they have these major legislation changing court rulings, they sort of suspend the application of them for a period of time. So they said the government has to bring in some legislation legalizing some form of euthanasia or assisted suicide, but we're going to suspend the application of the ruling for a year. And that was close enough to an election. At the time, we had a conservative government, but the decision was made, for better or worse, that we would tackle it post-election. And then that was the election in which our party lost, but I got elected. And it was sort of a weird time to come in as a new member, because a lot of members of our conservative caucus are feeling a little bit down, disappointed about the results of the election, and also maybe just a little bit pessimistic about the things we could accomplish in opposition. So when looking at an issue like euthanasia, they said, well, we're not the government, so what can we do? And some of us as new members, we're just really excited to be there, right? And we're like, well, I don't know, we could make some noise or something, right? Like we had this on the other side of the pessimism, this kind of outsized optimism combined with a complete lack of understanding of how things work. Right. So it was sort of a crazy time to be engaging such a critical issue, because I know there were a few of us who were new members who were, sort of trying to find the washrooms and figure out how to table amendments to legislation at the same time, right? Like there wasn't normally the advice you get when you come in as a new member of parliament is to sit and watch and listen for about 6 to 8 months so you can figure out how things are done. But for better or worse, that was just not an option when you get this kind of legislation. So the government sort of undertook a series of moves, which ended up making a already fairly extreme bill look fairly moderate. So they had this special committee study the issue, which kind of took the parameters of the court ruling and then pushed them way to the end with this very sort of extreme report. And I mean, our own conservative caucus is somewhat divided on the issue. There's a range of opinion there, so it's kind of hard to present a unified opposition to what the government is doing when there's diversity of opinion within our own caucus. So you had this special committee draft, I think, a very extreme report, calling for what would have been by far the most open-ended, lacking in safeguards euthanasia model in the world. And then you had the government propose a legislation that kind of took a few steps back from that, that attracted criticism from both the left and the right of it, if you like, that now the goalposts have been shifted. And what's amazing to me for this debate is that the goalposts just you get whiplash from how fast they're shifting, right? Where you had arguments in the Carter case saying, okay, we got to have this narrow thing where in specific cases of people that have considered it for a long time and repeatedly asked and or near death and all this, and it just keeps it just keeps moving. And so this new legislation, it responds to the fact that, I mean, our current justice minister at the time was not in cabinet at the time of the first legislation, and he was actually someone who voted against the euthanasia legislation, not because he thought it went too far, but because he thought it didn't go far enough. And then there was a lower court ruling which struck down some of the provisions of their new euthanasia law. And normally when you have a lower court ruling on a substantive public policy issue, you would at least appeal it to the Supreme Court. Right. But they chose not to appeal it to the Supreme Court. And then they said, oh, look, we've got a court ruling, we got to deal with it. Well, come on, like it's and it's also interesting is to say how, like, our political debate, it takes a court ruling very often, and then it kind of uses that as a jumping off point to go to all kinds of further extremes and says, well, the courts made us do it, right?
Right.
Right. And so the legislation we're dealing with now, it implements a court ruling around the specific issue of what they call advanced consent. So somebody who is concerned that their condition may deteriorate in a certain period of time, and they say, I would like to request now to receive euthanasia on July the 1st, right?
Right.
And if at the time the person objects, then they stop, but essentially they allow to administer euthanasia at that time. I mean, it raises big concerns about consent. I mean, we don't have advanced consent in any other contexts. My consent to do something 2 months from now is not sufficient in, I think, any other legal context. And I don't, even sort of on autonomy grounds, I don't think it makes sense to say that my present self should be able to make a decision for my future self. But anyways, in any event, that was the issue that was dealt with in the court ruling. But then with this legislation, the government did a number of other things. So this was like a real kicker for me, right? So the initial draft legislation that was proposed the last time around had a 14-day reflection period. So after somebody, this was whittled down to 10 days at committee, and we thought the 14 was better than 10. But now this legislation proposed to eliminate that completely, which means there's no reflection period at all.
And the reflection period is just basically, like you were saying, someone can choose that they want euthanasia administered to them, and then the law prior to Bill C-7 mandates that they wait 10 days before they
Yes.
actually have the administration of the drugs
Yeah.
that euthanize
Yeah.
them. But now the bill's saying we're going to get rid of that.
Exactly. And I would say already in the current law, that 10-day reflection period can be waived. So it sets a
Right.
kind of default, like, you know, so, and it also reduces the number of independent witnesses that are required. It changes. Before you had to have 2 independent witnesses. Now it's down to 1, and like independent witnesses can be staff, or like they're not. It's not actually the same requirement of independence. So I'm just like, there's 2 separate issues here when we talk about the contours of a euthanasia law. There's a question of eligibility criteria, and there's a question of safeguards. And I think we should understand that they're distinct issues. So eligibility criteria is who can get it, right? The original law said death had to be reasonably foreseeable, right? And I think the fact that anybody thinks death is not reasonably foreseeable to them is maybe a sort of weird product of our
Right.
culture. Like death is reasonably foreseeable for all of us, right?
Right.
From ashes we come, and
Right.
to ashes we shall return. But like that at least implied some sense that not quite terminal, but a person had to be approaching death.
Like there was some immediacy there's some immediacy in that language, like
poorly defined but implied, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So that is now being removed. So they've created separate tracks for people for whom it is and is not reasonably foreseeable, but now they've changed it. So the new legislation removes that requirement as well. So it's no longer medical assistance in dying. It's now, I mean, they'll call it medical assistance in dying, but it's more like, death on demand. You can die anytime you want. And but that's a question of eligibility criteria. Who can get it right now?
Right.
Now almost anybody, and there's people that are pushing to allow children to access it, to allow people with mental conditions to access it, and so that's sort of one category of issues, the eligibility criteria. The other category is a safeguard. So even if you think that anybody should be able to request and receive euthanasia, you would also think that there should be mechanisms to ensure that a person has actually consented, a person actually wants it, a person is, but we've severely weakened the safeguard. So now the way, if this legislation passes, the way it will work in Canada is, you only need 2 doctors, no reflection period. It could be any 2 doctors. One, it doesn't have to be your attending physician.
Okay.
There's no requirement for sort of clear records or video of consent, or 1 independent witness. So so if somebody's having a very bad day, right, and they make a request, and that person, gets the sign off of another doctor, there's no requirement that the other doctor who signs off even examines the patient. So they,
Wow.
they call a friend of theirs in another city who hears about the conditions and signs off as well, and then they bring in a nurse to witness it, and like that's it, right? Like that's those steps would satisfy the legal requirement. So what if that person didn't get that? What if the person didn't want euthanasia? There's a case under the current law where there was a facility that didn't allow euthanasia, and a doctor snuck in, killed someone, and their only basis for claiming that the person consented to euthanasia in this case was their own notes. Like this is so rampant for abuse, and I just plead with people, like, even if you agree with euthanasia in principle, and even if you think eligibility should be fairly open, think about the safeguards. Think about the fact that people will die who don't want to die if we don't have a little bit of double checking going on here.
Yeah, I think people, I mean, you're right to kind of highlight those 2 issues, the eligibility and the safeguards piece, because obviously as Catholics, we don't want any of it. Like we don't want anyone to be, hastening their death in this way, or any doctors to be participating in killing people, or any of this. But given that we are here with this law, we, this Bill C7 especially is really getting rid of safeguards that are protecting people who also don't want a part in this, but may be coerced, or maybe maybe unjustly killed, like, well, all of it, maybe, but just maybe killed without wanting any part of it. And that this is affecting, I know there's a lot of societies and organizations for people with disabilities who are advocates for people with disabilities who are speaking up against this, who have very different political opinions otherwise, from, let's say, Catholics or a more conservative view or anything like this, but who are worried about this legislation. So you spoke a bit about the rampant abuse that could come out of this. How would that impact, let's say, these kinds of communities, people with disabilities or our elderly? How might they be impacted by these changes?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think one of the things on the parliamentary side, if you compare the experience of the first bill to this bill, those of us who are engaged with this know what we're doing to a little bit of a greater extent now, and we were able to just identify those allies and bring them to testify before committee, I think, much more effectively. And I think that we probably lost the public debate on the first go around, but we've, I think, very clearly won the public debate here, where public opinion polls show that although most Canadians are supportive of euthanasia, they're concerned about the nature and provisions of the latest bill.
Mm-hmm.
The concerns from people in the disabled community are that that we are already seeing a situation where people are offered and pressured euthanasia as a result of their disability who don't want it, right? So if you're a able-bodied fit person who shows up with a particular health complaint, then the focus is on helping you get better. But if you're a person with a disability, unfortunately, what we heard from many witnesses is that there's a great risk that your interactions with the healthcare system will be sort of characterized by, oh, do you really want this treatment? Like, MAID is available. Like these kinds of, your life's not worth living, a type of. And so we look at this and say, like this is a serious issue of injustice and inequality when some people are offered, like, and for people with suicidal thoughts, some people are offered suicide prevention. For other people, it's like, oh, you want to die? Well, here's the process, right? And that generally, it's those who have a lot of quote unquote privilege and are able-bodied who are more likely to be offered that suicide prevention track as opposed to the suicide promotion track. So this is, this whole concept was advanced in the name of autonomy, but it does show how it ends up being about something other than autonomy, which is the valuation of different people's lives and experiences. And we heard testimony from, there's a guy named Roger Foley who I think it was an accident. He had some point of, like, he was able-bodied and they had some point of onset of dramatic disability. I think it was a car accident or something. And he was sort of repeatedly pressured and told, like, that to consider euthanasia. There's another case of a mom and her daughter. The daughter was offered euthanasia. That was offered to the mom, and they said no, they didn't want it, and they were sort of told they were being selfish. Like, people are being engaged in conversations about limited resources and all this, and it's really shocking. And so we have, again, I appreciate your point about there's a lot of people, I'm sure, who are listening to this who say we shouldn't even go down that road at all. Part of being in politics, I guess, is that you look at you try to kind of make things a little better based on what seems politically possible in the context of the parliament and the opinion environment, right? So so we put forward some, I think, reasonable amendments that were just trying to address this phenomena. So one of them was, like, you can't raise the subject of euthanasia with a patient unless they bring it up. So you're safe in a healthcare environment that seeks to affirm your health and life up until the point when you say, actually, I'm interested in going this route. And I think I don't think that is the fullness of the issue, but it would at least prevent people from this kind of harassment, really, that makes them feel unsafe and unvalued in healthcare environments. And unfortunately, that was that amendment was rejected.
I think that's so I don't even understand on like why. I don't understand why that couldn't have been a uniting sort of concept, because so that's very it's very difficult to hear that and think like, just trying to kind of rein in my doomsday thoughts, because it's just so upsetting to know that this attitude of death as treatment, of death as a solution, essentially, like that's really what euthanasia is like death is the solution to the pains of living, like, the reality of life, and instead of obviously other solutions that will help people to cope with the pains and realities of life, whatever they might be for each person. So it's just so upsetting to know that as a culture, as a system, in our politics and in our medical sort of system, we are heading towards this preference for death as one of and an equal option to other options for treatment.
So it's interesting, these debates, because I think a lot of the proponents of it, they frame this in terms of autonomy and choice, right? And they come from this kind of extreme manifestation of a classic liberal worldview, which is like you are the creators of your own concept of happiness and goodness, and if I want to believe that that all life is valuable, then I can behave in my own sphere in that way. And if somebody else wants to believe that death is a legitimate response to suffering, then they can, and that's freedom, and that's let us all sort of create our own conceptions of happiness. I think the problem with that reasoning, I mean, even if you accept the sort of the presumptions that are entailed in that way of thinking, in practice, what this has led to is a different view of disabled people by the healthcare system, where some people, what's the standard of care when someone comes in with certain with a certain presentation, right? And the fact that people will be treated and viewed differently depending on whether they're elderly, whether they're disabled, and that's not an issue of autonomy. That's an issue of how culture changes a person's experience of health. I gave a speech in the House of Commons, and this is sort of an analogy I used for this. So it's if in the classic liberal way of thinking, okay, more choice is better. So if you go to a restaurant and they offer you a chicken sandwich, a ham sandwich, and a vegetarian option, like, you're better off the more options you have, right? So if you don't like the menu, but if they make the menu longer, that's better for you. So more choice, more options, great, right? But on the other hand, if you went into a restaurant and they offered you like a human flesh sandwich, right? Like we cater to cannibals, or like, if that item was on the menu, you would probably feel very uncomfortable being there.
Yes.
even if you weren't planning on ordering it, right? Like nobody would go in, I mean, in that sort of weird hypothetical situation, but nobody would go into that restaurant and say, well, cannibalism isn't my thing, so I'll just have the chicken, right? The nature of the environment, like you would wonder, like am I going to be on the menu afterwards, right? Like what's like and so like you can't change what a hospital is without especially in a way that impacts some people differently from others, without changing the environment. But the other issue, would be to push back on the sort of rhetoric used around autonomy, is that this is being coupled with an aggressive attack on conscience protection, on the right of individuals and institutions to practice medicine in a way that's reflective of their own values. So you would hope in that case of the mother and the daughter has is being sort of offered, pressured towards euthanasia, that she would be able to at least find a a healthcare facility in the area where she's safe, right? So you have at least if you want autonomy, you have some measure of choice. So I can live my last days in the no euthanasia here healthcare facility, knowing that that just won't be a part of the conversation.
Right.
But the same people that are championing autonomy to die whenever you want, however you want, with as little waiting as possible, those people say you can't have these safe spaces for people that aren't interested in that, because those would violate their autonomy if they change their mind. Like it's a bizarre conception of autonomy that that actually doesn't allow the creation of spaces where elderly and disabled people would feel safe. So it's a lot of sort of contradictions in the heart of this argument. And I don't know if it's people who have just not thought through some of these things, or if there's something else going on. But it's anyways, we do our best, and I invite and encourage your listeners to get involved as well. There's so many great ways to get involved in the political process, and there's relatively small number of people that are politically active in Canada, and there's so many ways to do that, and we need all the reinforcements we can get.
So speaking of that, where do you recommend people go? Like what actions, let's say someone's out there listening to this who has no interest or zero involvement in politics before now, but they may, hopefully hearing our conversation, are realizing this is a very crucial thing to get involved in, no matter, what your past has been in terms of getting engaged. So how would that kind of person, what should they do? Where should they go?
Yeah. So, a first step is you can go to the website we've created, .ca. So nosameDayDeath.ca, sign the petition there. And a petition there is a way of expressing your concerns about the euthanasia bill, but also it's a way of getting in contact, because we've been sending follow-up emails to those who have signed that petition with specific action items, encouraging people at different times in the legislative process to be contacting members of the Justice Committee, contacting members of the Senate, and so forth. So these are some of the actions that can be taken. A lot of people are busy with their lives, and they may not follow all the mechanics of how this stuff works. But if you're on my email list, I can make sure that call this person at this critical point in time, and it will be helpful. Beyond that, I would encourage people to reach out and try to establish a relationship with your local member of parliament, even if they're not part of the party you've voted for in the past. It's one thing to send a letter, but it's another thing to say, hey, this is an issue I care a lot about. I wonder if I could meet you for 15 minutes and share with you my reflections on it. If you like that person, if you like what they have to say, you can get involved in their campaign. I mean, don't do that if they're doing things that are contrary to your values. But if you align with them, look for other ways to get involved and support them. You can find contacts quite easily for other political associations in your riding. So every riding, every constituency in Canada will have a riding association, or EDA they're called, for every political party. So if your response to your concerns from your sitting member of parliament is very negative, then you can engage with the riding association of a different party to try to get involved over there. And Canadian politics is, very open. I mean, in our party, we have a national convention coming up, and it's too late for this one, but there'll be future ones where anybody can become a member of the party, $15 to get a membership, and then you can participate in electing delegates or running to be a delegate to represent your riding association at that convention, and then that convention determines the policies that the Conservative Party will adopt going forward. So there's lots of these avenues to engage, and I'm like I don't come from a political family, right? I'm one of those many people that grew up maybe with an interest, that had a passion for a particular issue or set of issues, and just sort of plugged in and learned as I went. And if I can do it, you can do it. Anyone can do it as well. And I guess the other thing is, a lot of Christians' perception of politics is that it's a dirty game, right? Like that you have to compromise yourself in all kinds of ways. And I think, there is some challenge to figuring out. So we've been talking about euthanasia, something that many listeners may be uncomfortable with completely, but then figuring out how to at least minimize the damage of it through safeguards and other protections. And that's yes, that is part of it. I mean, in terms of being wise as serpents, right? Thinking strategically, but you should not, and you don't have to compromise on fundamental moral points to be in politics. I mean, I don't think I've compromised on anything fundamental since I've been elected. And there are great communities of people working in politics who you will find who share your values and care about the issues you care about. So so it doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter how long you've been in the country, doesn't matter what you have known up until now. It is so possible to get involved in politics. I think it's demonstrated, and I'll just kind of close on this one. It's demonstrated by the fact that we have many people in Parliament who were not born in this country. And I think that's a fairly unique feature for Canada, where to accumulate the connections and the money and the sort of privilege and status you need, in some countries, politics is very generational, right? But here we've got many people who grew up, had maybe even lived for a long time and had careers in other countries, came to Canada and then got elected. It just shows how accessible our politics is.
Right. Yeah. And this conversation shows how important it is for people to get involved, who have a sense of hope and value life, and can work to at least, I don't know, voice those values in that sphere, and do some practical things around them, like you're talking about with the safeguards. Unfortunately, this is the conversation we're having because this is our law right now. We are in a post legalized euthanasia society, but there's still things we can do, and we have to. I would just urge anyone listening, like, do something. Just at least do one thing. If you're kind of set on fire with our conversation about getting involved in politics, then get involved in a deeper way. If you just want to do one thing, then go to nosamedaydeath.ca and sign the petition. Just do one thing. So thanks, Garnett. It's been such a joy and privilege to talk to you about this. We're really hoping our listeners are going to get galvanized and energized to engage with this issue. And if you're not Canadian, I don't know where you are in your political reality on this issue, but to just be aware that it's part of our global culture in certain countries, especially in our country, but in others as well. And, to be on guard and to get involved with your community, so that hope is always a part of the culture that you're creating in your life and in your community. So.
Yeah, and just maybe I to say for the non-Canadians, I mean, Canada's experience on this should be a cautionary tale. So, if you're looking at debates in your own country, your own jurisdictions around euthanasia, take a look at what's happened in Canada and how quickly it's changed and the impact it's had on the safety that people from certain communities feel in our healthcare, and point to us as on a road that you should not be on. So if nothing else, hopefully we can be helpful that way.
Yeah. So true. Okay. Thank you, Garnett. God bless everybody. And we look forward to more episodes in this series on euthanasia to learn about the issue and also to hear from people who are being impacted currently by it. Bye for now. Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Thicket. If you like what you hear, give us a rating and hit that subscribe button. We have new episodes every Monday with more stories and honest conversations about life when the going gets rough, and the hope and humor amidst it all. We'd love for you to join our community on Instagram and Facebook at In the Thicket Podcast. While you're there, let us know how we can pray for you. God bless, and see you next week.